Recent revelations from the U.S. Internal Revenue Service showed for the first time just how little tax American billionaires pay relative to their wealth. It's reignited a major debate about exactly who is paying their fair share. And while some have pointed to billionaires such as Warren Buffett, who's long called for tax reform to make the rich pay more, as evidence that some of the super rich are well-meaning, writer Anand Giridharadas apparently isn't buying it. He's the author of Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world, and he joins us now from Brooklyn, New York, and it's good to have you back on our program. Anand, how are you doing?
It's good to be back with you. I feel like I'm becoming a veteran.
Yes, you are. Let's start with this recent report from ProPublica, and then we'll come up with a question after we lay the case out here. We compared just how much in taxes the 25 richest Americans paid each year to how much Forbes estimates their true wealth grew in that same period of time. And we're going to call this their true tax rate. And the results are stark. According to Forbes, those 25 people saw their worth rise a collective $401 billion from the years 2014 to 18. They paid a total of $13.6 billion in federal income taxes in those 5 years, the IRS data shows. That is a staggering sum, but it amounts to a true tax rate of only 3.4%. And here's a look at the four wealthiest Americans. Leading the pack is Warren Buffett, and his wealth grew by $24 billion between 2014 and 18. He paid $23.7 million in taxes. His true tax rate is 0.10%. Then it's Jeff Bezos with a true tax rate of 0.98% on his wealth growth of $99 billion over those 4 years. Number 3 is Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, with a true tax rate of 1.3% on his $23 billion in wealth growth. And then Tesla's Elon Musk at 3.27% on $13.9 billion in growth. Can I get you, Anand, just to start with, can I get you to characterize the rate of tax payment those four are paying, if you would?
They are essentially paying taxes on a construct called income that is a relevant construct for most people, but an irrelevant and trivial concept for super wealthy people. So taxing super wealthy people on their income is sort of like handing out awards at a pie eating contest according to people's shoe size. You're just simply measuring the wrong thing. If you are a billionaire, as those charts you just showed illustrate, your wealth grows through the appreciation of the value of things you own, through the appreciation of your capital stock. Taxing you on your income, it's just nonsensical. And what this story reveals is, yes, some amount of tax trickery and Jeff Bezos claiming a $4,000 child tax credit and not paying any income taxes in any given year, and all of that, but it's not really individual sins that are being revealed here so much as a social contract built on madness. We have made a societal decision to tax working for a living, AKA income, and to essentially not tax the appreciation of wealth, which is sitting on piles of money for a living.
And we'll come back and talk more about that in a second. One of the billionaires mentioned in that article, incidentally, said that publishing his personal tax information is in fact a violation of his privacy. Is that in fact the case?
Well, it is in the narrow sense that leaking that information is, not allowed, probably, if you're a government official, but journalism is not beholden to that kind of requirement. It may be a requirement that you're not supposed to leak it if you work at the IRS, but it's not necessarily the journalist's duty to respect that privacy if it is deemed in the public interest to reveal that. No one's mistress's names were being revealed here. No one's secret yacht names were being revealed here. This is aggregate information about how some of the richest people in the world don't pay taxes. And if anything is in the public interest, it's that. And I also just want to say, congratulations to whoever leaked this, because you got to remember, the IRS does not keep a file of the 25 richest people and here's all their stuff, right? That's like something in the Forbes list. That's not an official category of the US government, 25 richest people. So someone really thought through what would make a good story and what would help illustrate this issue for people and packaged it brilliantly. And I'm just, kind of in awe of those leakers.
Well, there's another billionaire investor by the name of Carl Icahn, well-known person in your country. And here's a quote that he came up with. He said, there's a reason it's called income tax. The reason is if you're a poor person, a rich person, if you are Apple, if you have no income, you don't pay taxes. What's your take on that?
Well, here's what you got to understand. So what most people do is they go work, and then in exchange for working, they get an income, and they spend most of that income every year on their rent and their food and things like that. And then there's some little bit left that is saved or that's invested or that's put towards some kind of rainy day fund or what have you. And therefore, the only real money to tax for regular people is sort of that income. And by the way, regular people actually do pay a wealth tax in addition to that in the US through property taxes, which again is not based on your income. That if you have a home that's worth $100,000, you will pay a certain fraction of property tax every year, and the government doesn't care whether you have liquid cash or don't. You may have to liquidate cash. You may have to go, take a loan. You got to pay that property tax, which is a wealth tax. Now, if you're very wealthy, what happens is, let's say you have, $50 billion in the bank. Well, the way in which your money is growing is not through a salary coming in, right? It's growing through the appreciation of that 50 billion into 55 the next year, into 65 the year after that. And furthermore, and this is actually the most important contribution of this story, I thought, they explained that in order to live, right, because these people do have to buy their yachts, and they do have to take care of spouses as well as mistresses, and they do have to take care of education for their kids. They have expenses, and they actually have lavish expenses. They have 8 homes. You got to actually pay for those homes. How do they do that without selling stock, which would then subject them to capital gains taxes, right? That's at the heart of the story. And it turns out the answer is they go to a bank and they say, I want a loan, right? So I'm worth $50 billion. I want a loan for living expenses. So let's call it $300 million, like a $300 million loan, which might translate into monthly payments of, whatever. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my stock, some of those 50 billion, as collateral. As long as you're willing to do that, the bank's very happy to give you that $300 million loan, right? In fact, to even make those monthly payments, let's say you have $1 million a month monthly payment, what they sometimes do is then they take out an additional loan to pay the first loan. So they're actually not having to expend any cash to service this loan. And then I have $300 million in cash to spend, which they've gotten just by offering the bank paper stock collateral. And they can go through their whole life basically never selling their stock, never paying capital gains taxes on it, and asking their accountants to keep their income figure really low or artificially lowering it by selling off certain things here and there, declaring losses on certain things. What you're seeing in this article, and I really want people to understand this, is a portrait of a certain kind of life in which one can essentially from young adulthood through death bypass the entire system of taxation of the country while being among the biggest beneficiaries of the structures and systems that those taxes pay for.
But I guess one of the questions we have to ask is, do we blame them for taking advantage of perfectly legal loopholes that are in the tax system, or do we blame the politicians who wrote the tax system to be this way and let them get away with all this? What's the answer to that?
All of the above. Things being legal doesn't make them moral. I mean, it was a shame that slavery was once legal in this country. But it was legal in this country. And just because it was legal doesn't mean that I absolve anybody who did what was legal in that time. It was legal to buy and sell people in that time. And I sure hope people were wise enough not to do it. And if you did do it, it doesn't matter. You don't have an alibi in the idea that it was legal. It was wrong. I think it is wrong to hoard $100 billion through a system that is indefensible, unless, and I think there's a important unless here, unless you are literally doing everything in your power to dismantle that undue privilege.
Well, let me pick up on that, can I? Let me pick up on that, because
Sure.
I did read your piece in the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times the other day. Fascinating column, and I guess I I guess I'm one of those who thought Warren Buffett was one of the good guys, and then I read your column which says he's not one of the good guys. And I thought he was one of the good.
One of the good guys, and the good guys are the most dangerous guys.
Okay, all right. I guess I thought he was one of the good guys because I remember him saying he wants to give away 99.5% of his fortune. And in response to ProPublica's report, he wrote, quote, "I continue to believe that the tax code should be changed substantially and that huge dynastic wealth is not desirable for our society." So he seems to be in the right place. His heart seems to be in the right place. Why is his being one of the good guys making him one of the most dangerous guys as well?
Because the bad guys are quasi-criminals, right? I mean, there are people who commit financial fraud on Wall Street. There are people who run social media platforms in ways that imperil democracy and enable white supremacy. There are people who make billions of dollars selling opioids. That's a certain category of thing. And those stories dominate the news. You've done stories on those things. I've done stories on those things. When people focus on those stories, we're at risk of miseducating them that the problem is the corruption of the system, when in fact the problem is just the system. And part of what is powerful about this story is even when the system is working well, even when you have a well-intentioned person like Warren Buffett, this is barbarism. It is barbarism to have people accumulating $100 billion plus fortunes, while here in New York City, all around me, one of the richest cities in the history of human civilization, there were all these kids this year who couldn't do the remote learning they had to do because they don't have Wi-Fi in New York City in the year 2020 and 2021. These resources are resources that were not paid as wages to folks, were not paid as taxes. And Warren Buffett is playing this interesting double game that we got to be real about. Warren Buffett says, my income taxes should be higher. What this article reveals is that is a trick because he doesn't have a lot of income. He doesn't report a lot of income. So it's not a surprise now that this story has come out that Warren Buffett is in favor of raising income taxes because Warren Buffett basically does not have a lot of income. And he presumably constructs his affairs to not have a lot of income, right? And what he does have is appreciating wealth. And I have not heard Warren Buffett advocate for Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax or Bernie Sanders' wealth tax. There have been proposals on the table. Where has he been? Where has he been? If he's truly in favor of ending dynastic wealth and breaking down these fortunes, there have been proposals on the table that you and I have spent time discussing before, and half the country has discussed before here in the United States. Where was he? There was no op-ed then. What he has done is advocate for raising taxes on a kind of money that he doesn't really have, which is income.
Well, let's just remind everybody what Elizabeth Warren had to say, because we're going back a couple of years now when she was running for the Democratic presidential nomination. She proposed a wealth tax on 2% of assets worth more than $50 million and 3% on assets worth more than $1 billion. That was then. Where do you think we should be now on those numbers?
What's interesting is I think that her plan, and then Bernie Sanders had a plan. These were very, very important conversation starters. They were elevated into the presidential campaign. I think we had a real debate about capitalism and billionaires in this 2020 presidential primary on the Democratic side that we have not had before in America, and that was terrific. But I actually think, in light of what this reporting is showing, even the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders wealth tax plans are good starts, but inadequate to the problem. I mean, grossly inadequate to the problem, possibly inadequate by a factor of 5 or 10. And the reason is these fortunes tend to grow at least at a rate of return of 10% and above, right? Often 15, 20, 25%. In other words, these folks have they don't invest in, they don't have a Fidelity account with like some stocks and bonds the way someone watching this does. They have access to all kinds of, IPOs and special purpose vehicles and early things in companies and rounds of Series A, Series B investments. So those things have a much higher return. They're more speculative, they have a higher return. So if these folks have $1 billion one year, they have $1.2 billion next year, and then it goes on from there, right? Compounding. So the Warren wealth tax, 2 or 3%, even a little higher when she raised it later. The Bernie one, I think, is somewhere in the 8 to 10% neighborhood. This would not actually shrink fortunes. This would slow the rate of growth of fortunes, right? So someone who has $1 billion now, who might have, $10 billion by the end of the decade, might instead, under their plans, end up with $5 billion at the end of the decade instead of $1 billion. They've still pulled drastically ahead of you. They've still increased their clout over public life, public schools, public health, public parks, but they've pulled ahead of you slightly more slowly than they might have. What I'm suggesting is an erosive wealth tax, where the $1 billion would become, let's say, 900 million the next year, and then it would become 800 million the year after that. An erosive wealth tax is important partly because it would pay for a bunch of stuff, which Sanders and Warren detailed, but it's also important because even if it paid for nothing, even if you put it in a chest at the bottom of the ocean, cutting down these fortunes, and I want folks to pay attention to this idea, cutting down these fortunes is an intrinsic good in and of itself, even if it finances nothing.
How come?
This is really important to understand. Simply having $100 billion and existing in this society is too much power. It is a power differential that a democracy cannot tolerate.
Well, can we play this through? And by that I mean, during the course of the last 15, 16 months during the pandemic, there are particular companies that have done particularly well by virtue of what they've been able to do versus others that have had to shut down. Walmart, Costco, Amazon, we know the list. If any government, a state, a province, a country, tried to go to them and say, you have done really well through the course of this pandemic, and we want to put a special tax on you to acknowledge your windfall, what do you think would happen?
Well, the general way to do taxation is not to go to anybody and tell them anything. It's just to pass the legislation. So I wouldn't go to them. I would just tax them, right? The going to them part is what, is where the breakdown happens, because these companies, as you say, thrived while other businesses failed. They thrived in part because there was new demand for things in the pandemic that there wasn't before, but they also thrived because they were powerful. They had wiped out competition through monopolies in the case of Amazon. They had, destroyed the leverage of small suppliers, as Walmart is famous for doing. And so when something calamitous like the pandemic happened, they were in a very good position to take all. My book's called Winners Take All. I mean, these winners were in a very good position to take all because of the groundwork they had been laying for years, right? So these shops in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, they were doing badly before the pandemic too. Just IRL physical shops were having a hard time for a long time. The pandemic just knocked them out, but Amazon had been knocking them out for a while. And if you read the extraordinary new reporting in the New York Times this week from Jodi Kantor and her colleagues on the internal dynamics of working at JFK 8, which is Amazon's biggest facility here in New York, it reveals that when companies have this much power over workers, essentially in a kind of imperial power over workers, there is simply no chance people have to lead a dignified life. And to have any shot at collective bargaining or any of the other things we've known. So the only thing that is going to work to rein these companies in is taxing them and regulating them involuntarily. If they like the policy, that's the sign it's not a good policy. If they consent to it or do it voluntarily, it's a sign that it's not a good policy. Policies that are painful to them but good for the commons are what we need now.
Well, here's what I don't get, and I'm hoping you're going to be able to help me figure this out, because well, I'll just read the quote here. We face now the possibility of a taxpayer revolt if we do not soon make major reforms in our income taxes. Now, an American Treasury Secretary said that. That was President Lyndon Johnson's Treasury Secretary who said that more than 50 years ago. Why hasn't the taxpayer revolt happened?
Well, the taxpayer revolt has happened in this country, but unfortunately it's happened the wrong way. I mean, it happened starting in the 70s, and Americans for Tax Reform and Grover Norquist and all these activists on the right, what they did was they convinced regular people, middle-class people, upper middle-class people, that they were really being kind of put upon by the government and burdened by out-of-control taxation. And then they used that energy the Republican votes that generated to cut taxes generally in ways that mostly benefited people far, far, far richer than those voters. There are a lot of those voters. They needed a bunch of those voters. But who do they actually cut taxes for? The top 1%. In fact, the 0.1% or the 0.01%. Look at something like the Trump tax cut, $2 trillion, whatever it was. I mean, almost all the benefits flowing to the very top. But if you only got that 1% of people to vote for it, you wouldn't win office. So their whole game has been to actually create this, manufactured tax revolt among right-wing voters, which then gets them into office, and then they never actually do anything for their own voters. They just do things for the bankers and the CEOs.
But we have discovered during the past 15 months that actually, when you know what hits the fan, it's not a bad idea for governments to have the capacity to help people out and protect people from the worst ravages of, in this case, a pandemic. In your view, does this potentially open a door to a broader conversation about tax reform?
Yeah, and I think we're having that conversation. And as you say, it's not just a conversation about taxes. The pandemic, well before this particular story, the pandemic revealed so much about the American social contract. I know from my many travels to Canada how, strange you all sometimes think we are. And you're right, we are strange. We have made a choice to prioritize, 25 people hoarding resources over, hundreds of millions of people having a flourishing, decent, dignified life, having a chance to rise, having a chance to make their dreams real. And I think the pandemic forced people into an awakening around the stupidity of linking whether you have health care to whether you happen to be employed today. I think it awakened people to the need for some kind of universal basic income or some kind of income support that's guaranteed and not dependent on whether your member of Congress is feeling, dyspeptic or not in a given morning. I think it revealed the importance of some of these safety nets that have been gutted. I think it revealed the importance of utilities like broadband and Wi-Fi, which, when people are depending on them for learning and for doing their jobs, are simply inadequate in this country. And now, as you say, I think this story could be a signal moment of making people realize you're being scammed. Whatever your ideology is, you are literally paying more in taxes in certain years than Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is heading to space soon, and he will be laughing at you from space that you, driving a truck, delivering milk, delivering DoorDash, teaching in a public school, working on an oil rig, you literally paid more in dollar terms in taxes than he did in certain years. Not as a percentage. You literally paid more dollars in federal income tax than he did.
Yeah, because he used all the legal loopholes to make his effective tax rate nothing.
Right, and you might do that also if you had an army of lobbyists working for you, but unfortunately only he has that.
Can I touch on that? We got a few minutes left here, and I do want to touch on that because, again, going back to New York Times reporting here, the $4.5 trillion private equity industry, quote, has perfected sleight of hand tax avoidance strategies so aggressive that private equity officials have alerted the IRS to potentially illegal tactics. The gist of it is that these corporations that you've been talking about are too big, too sophisticated, and too far ahead of whatever the IRS can possibly throw their way. True?
Yes, and it's kind of a reason to tax wealth, right? Because wealth is just the outcome. Whereas when you're all these other ways of capital gains and income and this and that, you're kind of taxing the process. And there are ways of shifting things around in the process to change what's being counted and how it's being counted and when it's being counted, right? But at the end of the day, at any given moment, someone is worth a certain amount. They just are. And the elegance of saying 3% of whatever that is needs to be sent here by this date, it's actually remarkably simple. As we learned from Donald Trump and his tax returns and so many others, these folks can literally name any income figure they want, right? You can't do that watching this, but they can. They can decide they want their income to be $1. They can decide they want it to be $100 million. They can decide they want their income to be negative in a particular year. Whatever their needs are, they can just make their income the number they want and therefore pay the taxes they want. And unless you are taxing wealth, you are not serious, I think, at this moment in American life about making sure we have a democracy instead of a plutocracy.
In which case, let's finish up on this. I know politicians love to find issues where 90% of the public are on their side and maybe 10% disagree. There are actually precious few 90-10 issues out there, but surely taxing billionaires would be one of them. There are populists in the Republican Party, there are populists in the Democratic Party, and there are plenty of common sense people in both parties who surely would see this issue the way you are seeing it. In which case, why hasn't it happened?
That's such an insightful question. You're right. First of all, you're right empirically. The polling is actually pretty eye-opening on the wealth tax. When the Warren wealth tax came out, there was some detailed polling on it. A clear majority of of Democrats liked it, but I think it was about half of Republicans, if I remember correctly, also favored it. When AOC came up with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out with this very high income tax, 70% marginal income tax on $10 million a year or more of income. Again, huge Democratic support, but significant independent and Republican support. So the answer to your question is, A, yes, this is a 90-10 issue in terms of raw public opinion, or could be if you had the right backing. B, why doesn't it happen in spite of that? Well, there's a billionaire veto. So a lot of 90-10 issues in the United States don't become 90-10 votes because A, the people in Congress are just way richer than average people in general. But more importantly, they're beholden to big donors, to dark money, and those forces are hell-bent, on preventing this above anything, probably. I mean, nothing is more existentially threatening to them than, having 10% of your wealth disappear every year, even though it's the right thing to do. And so I think it is going to require some really powerful cross ideological organizing to build a coalition for this issue. But I will tell you, as someone who's written about this for a long time, argued about it for a long time, I think there is a growing groundswell across battle lines on this issue. I think there's a growing recognition that whether you're left or center or right, you are living in a scam and you are not on the good end of the scam, and people much richer than you have organized the society to be a casino where they always win. And I actually think a lot of Americans, if properly educated about this, have it in them to rise up and take the American dream back from billionaires who want to privatize it.
We shall keep watching. Mr. Giridharadas, we always enjoy your appearances on our program. Thanks for joining us again tonight on TVO.
Steve, thanks for having me.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.